The cabin smelled like pine sap and something that had been sitting too long on a cold stove. My daughter carried my overnight bag to the bedroom herself, which should have been my first sign. She never carried anything without being asked twice. "Just a few days," she said, smoothing the quilt on the bed with both hands, not looking at me. "You need the rest, Mom. You've been running on fumes since your last checkup." Her boyfriend was already back in the truck by the time I turned to say I hadn't actually agreed to any of this. I heard the engine idle, then rev. "Silas has a work thing," she said. "I'll be back Thursday, promise." Thursday. It was Monday. She kissed me on the forehead like I was the child, and she was the adult putting me to bed. And then the door clicked shut and I stood in a cabin I'd never been to before, in the mountains, 3 hours from home. I told myself I was being silly, paranoid. She was right. I had been tired. My hands had been shaking more than usual. I'd been forgetting small things. She was just trying to help. I unpacked my bag slowly. She'd packed it herself, I realized. One change of clothes. My blood pressure medication, at least. A paperback novel I hadn't chosen. No charger for my phone. I checked my phone. 1 bar. By Tuesday morning, I had no bars. By Wednesday, I understood. I'd known something was off, in the way you know a storm is coming before the sky changes color. Not the facts yet. Just the feeling in your chest, that low pressure, the animal certainty of a thing you don't want to name. My purse wasn't in the cabin. I remembered now. I'd had it in the truck. My wallet, my cards, my ID. She'd said she'd put it up front so it wouldn't get lost in the back seat. It was still up front, in his truck 200 miles south. The cabin had a landline. I picked it up, no dial tone. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, looking at the window, at the tree line, at the sky going pale, and then dark, and then pale again. 68 years old, retired after 30 years in the classroom. I had raised my daughter alone after my husband Frank died of a heart attack at 54. I had taught other people's children to read, to add fractions, to believe that being careful mattered. And now I was sitting in a stranger's cabin with no money, no car, no way to call anyone, trying to decide if my own daughter had left me there on purpose. On Thursday, nobody came. I found a box of crackers in the cabinet and ate them slowly over 2 days. I drank water from the tap. I walked the road in front of the cabin on Friday morning, waving at 2 cars before the third one stopped. A young woman with a baby in the back seat drove me to the nearest town without asking many questions, and I sat in a gas station and used the payphone, the last payphone I'd seen in probably 15 years, to call my daughter's cell. It rang 4 times, went to voicemail. I called again, same. I called the house, my house, the number I'd had since 1999. A recorded message told me the number was no longer in service. I bought a bus ticket to the city with $7 I found in my coat pocket. Change from a pharmacy run 2 weeks ago. I held on to it like it was a life vest. The bus took 4 hours. I sat in the back and watched the mountains shrink in the rear window and tried to think logically. I was a school teacher. I made lists. I solved problems in steps, so I made a list in my head. What I knew, what I didn't know, what I needed to find out. What I knew, my daughter and her boyfriend had driven me to a remote cabin and left me there without money or communication. The house phone was disconnected. She wasn't answering. What I didn't know, why. What I needed to find out, everything else. I got off the bus downtown and walked 12 blocks to my house on Garland Street. The house Frank and I bought together in 1991. The house where I'd painted every room myself, where my daughter had grown up, where Frank's reading chair still sat by the window because I hadn't been able to move it. From half a block away, I could see the sign in the yard, blue and white, a real estate agency, for sale. I stopped walking. A man in a polo shirt was unlocking the front door with a key that wasn't mine. 2 women with clipboards followed him in. I stood on the sidewalk in front of the house where I'd lived for 34 years and watched strangers walk through the front door. My neighbor from across the street stepped off his porch. Chester had lived there as long as I had. Retired, widowed, a man who moved slowly and spoke less than you expected, but always precisely. He'd been a family attorney before he retired. I'd brought him banana bread after his wife passed. He crossed the street toward me, and his face told me he already knew something was wrong. Dorothy said you'd moved, he said carefully. Dorothy was 2 doors down, the neighborhood one who always meant well. She said you were going to assisted living near your sister. I wasn't, I said. Chester looked at the real estate sign, looked at me. Come inside, he said. You look like you need to sit down. At Chester's kitchen table, I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which was the best thing he could have done. He let me get through all of it before he said a word. How much cash do you have? He asked. $3 and some change. He nodded. He went to another room and came back with $200 in an envelope and the name of a woman he trusted, Iris, a civil attorney, small practice, but fierce in court. Before anything else, he said, you need to file a police report. I did. The officer who took my statement was young and patient, but by the end of it, I could tell he'd filed it under family dispute. He said he'd look into it. He said it twice, which meant he wouldn't. But I had the report number, and that was what mattered. The bank was next. I'd been a customer for 31 years. The branch manager knew me by name, or had, until 3 years ago when they brought in someone new. But the woman at the front desk recognized me from before she worked there. I'd been her daughter's second-grade teacher. She didn't ask me for ID, she just got the manager. His name was on a plaque on his desk, but I didn't need it. What I needed was what he showed me when I asked about my accounts. A power of attorney, filed 6 days ago, granting my daughter full access to my primary checking account, my savings, and my pension direct deposit. I asked to see the signature. It wasn't mine. The loops were too clean. My handwriting has a slight leftward lean from decades of writing on chalkboards at an angle. Whoever had signed this had tried to imitate my signature from a copy of something, a check, maybe, or an old document, and gotten it almost right. Almost. That's not my signature, I said. The manager looked at it again. The notary's stamp is fake, I said. I'd like to freeze everything immediately, and I'd like a copy of every transaction made in the last 10 days. He printed the statements. There had been 2 withdrawals, $1,200 the day I'd been taken to the cabin, $4,500 3 days later. I took the copies and left. Iris's office was in a brick building near the courthouse, with no sign out front except her name on a frosted glass door. Chester had said she doesn't advertise. She doesn't need to. That told me enough. She was in her 50s, with the kind of still, watchful face that doesn't give anything away until it's ready to. She shook my hand firmly, poured me coffee without asking, and said, Chester called ahead. Tell me what you know. I told her. When I finished, she turned her legal pad around so I could see her notes. She'd drawn a timeline. The power of attorney is fraudulent, she said. We can prove that with a handwriting comparison. The property deed. Has there been a transfer filed? She made a call while I sat there. 3 minutes later, she had an answer. The deed to my house on Garland Street had been amended 4 days ago, listed as a voluntary transfer into joint ownership, myself and my daughter. She couldn't sell it without that step, Iris said. She needed your name on it, so they forged the amendment. Silas, I said. She looked at me. Her boyfriend, I said. He's been pushing her since they got together. She started talking about the future of the house 8 months ago. I thought she meant after I died. I paused. I didn't think she meant now. Iris set down her pen. I'll file an emergency motion to freeze the property today. No sale can proceed once it's flagged. But I need to ask you something. Do you want to press charges? I want my house back, I said, and I want to understand how much of this was her idea and how much was his. We'll find out, she said. 2 days later, I found out. Chester let me use his computer. A woman at the county records office. She'd been there since before I retired and had always complimented my Christmas cards. Pulled the deed amendment history without me having to explain much. She printed everything and slid it across the counter quietly. The way you hand someone a tissue when they haven't started crying yet, but you can tell they will. The deed amendment had been filed by Silas. His signature, not my daughter's. A notary stamp I tracked back to a man 2 counties over who had been flagged twice before for fraudulent notarizations. Then Iris called. Your daughter's cell phone records, she said. Her provider responded. There were calls between her and the real estate agency going back 4 months. But there are also texts, in the last 2 weeks, between her and Silas. She was asking him to slow down. He wasn't listening. She knew, I said. She knew something. I'm not sure she knew all of it. That night, I lay in Chester's spare room. He'd insisted, and stared at the ceiling. My daughter had grown up in that house. She'd done her homework at the kitchen table. She'd called me from the hospital the night she broke her wrist at 15, and I'd driven 40 minutes in a snowstorm to get her. She wasn't cruel. She'd never been cruel. She had been weak, which is a different thing, though it doesn't feel different when you're the one left in a mountain cabin with no phone and no money, and the house signs already in the yard. She showed up on Thursday. She knocked on Chester's door, not mine. She knew I was there. She'd seen Chester's car in my driveway enough times. She stood on the step with her arms crossed over her chest like she was cold, even though it was 62 degrees. I let her in. Chester went quietly to the other room. She sat at the kitchen table and didn't speak for almost a full minute. Then, he said it would just be the cabin, a few days. He said you needed rest and that you'd understand once we explained everything. He took my purse, I said. She closed her eyes. I know. You didn't come back Thursday. He said you'd be fine. He said he'd go get you. She stopped. I should have gone myself. I know that. Did you sign the deed? The silence was its own answer. He said it was temporary, she finally said. A formality. So he could manage the sale on his behalf while I was. She stopped again. I was going to tell you. We were going to explain everything, find you a nice place, somewhere closer. This is my house, I said. I paid for it. I scraped and saved and worked summers to make sure we didn't lose it the year your father died. And you signed it over to a man you've known for 2 years. She was crying now. I wasn't. How much of the money did you know about? I asked. The $1,200. He said it was for the cabin deposit. There was also $4,500, I said. 3 days later. Did you know about that? She went very still. No, she said quietly. No, I didn't know about that. That was when I saw it, the crack. The moment she understood that the man she'd trusted had been running something she wasn't fully part of. Something he'd been building without her, using her signature as a tool and her love for him as a blind. I didn't comfort her. I wasn't cold, but I wasn't going to comfort her. Iris needs you to give a statement, I said. She needs you to describe everything you knew, when you knew it, what you agreed to, and what you didn't. If he filed documents without your knowledge or forged your consent to things you didn't consent to, that matters legally. But you'll have to be honest. All the way honest. Against him, she whispered. For the truth, I said. She came in the next morning. She sat in Iris's office for 2.5 hours. I waited in the hall. When she came out, her eyes were swollen and her hands were deep in her pockets. She stopped in front of me. The $4,500, she said, and 3 other transactions he had paperwork drawn up, for that I never saw. He was going to do it in stages. I was the name on the form. I looked at my daughter, the girl I had raised, the woman she had become, imperfect, capable of choices I couldn't understand, but not someone who had set out to erase me. Silas had done that part. She had handed him the pen, yes, but she hadn't known where he was signing. That doesn't fix anything yet, I said, but it's a start. The court date came on a gray Tuesday. I wore my good wool blazer, the one I'd bought for Frank's retirement dinner and kept in a garment bag ever since. I pinned a small gold brooch at the collar, not for anyone else, just to remind myself I was still myself. Iris had submitted the handwriting analysis, the false notary identification, the fraudulent power of attorney, the property deed amendment. My daughter's full statement detailing what Silas had done without her knowledge, and the bank records showing the unauthorized withdrawals. Silas had a lawyer, young, well-dressed, voice like someone who had rehearsed it in a mirror. The judge was a woman, older than me, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the expression of someone who had heard every possible variation of human dishonesty and was no longer surprised by any of it. Iris spoke first. She was brief. She laid out the timeline like a math problem. This happened on this date. This was filed on this date. This signature does not match the one on file at the county. This notary's license was suspended. She didn't ask for sympathy, she asked for facts. The other lawyer tried to say I'd been confused, forgetful, that my daughter had been acting with concern for my well-being. The judge looked up over her glasses. "Ma'am," she said to me, "do you have a statement?" I stood up. I hadn't brought notes. I'd written something out and memorized it, and then at the last moment decided not to use it, because it had sounded too formal for what I actually needed to say. "I taught second grade for 30 years, I said. "I know what confusion looks like. I know the difference between a child who doesn't understand and a child who understands perfectly and has decided not to show it." I paused. What happened to me was not the result of confusion. My signature was forged. My property was transferred without my consent. I was driven to a mountain cabin 3 hours from home, without money, without identification, without phone service, and left there for 6 days. I found my way home on $7 and a bus ticket. I let that sit for a moment. I am 68 years old. I intend to live in my house for as long as I am able. I intend to be consulted about decisions that affect my life. I am not a problem to be managed. I am a person, and I am standing here. I sat down. The courtroom was very quiet. The judge ruled the same afternoon. The power of attorney was void. The deed amendment was struck. The accounts were to be audited. Silas was referred to the district attorney for fraud, elder financial abuse, and forgery. My daughter's cooperation was noted as a mitigating factor in any related proceedings against her. Outside the courthouse, the air was cool and sharp. Iris shook my hand and said, "I'll have the locksmith at your house by 4. Chester drove me there. The real estate sign was gone. The court order had handled that 2 days prior. My hydrangeas needed water. The loose porch board was still loose. The key the locksmith gave me was silver and new and fit perfectly. I walked through every room. The furniture had been rearranged. Silas had someone come in to stage it for photographs, moving pieces to make the house look like nobody really lived there. My kitchen table was pushed against the wrong wall. Frank's reading chair was in the hallway. I moved the chair back myself. It was heavy. I didn't ask for help. That night, I made soup from what was in the pantry and sat at my own kitchen table in my own house and ate it in the quiet. Not the silence of absence, the silence of a place that knows it belongs to you. My daughter called. I let it ring twice before I answered. "The locksmith texted me," she said. "Yes." A pause. "Are you home?" "I'm home." She was quiet for a moment. I could hear her breathing. "He was arrested this afternoon," she said. "Silas." "I know." Another pause. "Mom, she stopped. Started again. I don't know how to start that sentence." "You don't have to start it tonight," I said. She exhaled. "Can I come by this week?" I looked around the kitchen. The table, the curtains I'd hemmed myself 20 years ago, the photograph of Frank and me at Acadia that was back on the wall where it belonged. "Thursday," I said. "Come for dinner." She said she would. After we hung up, I went outside and stood in the dark yard for a few minutes. The neighbor's dog was barking somewhere down the street. The street light above the driveway hummed like it always had. The hydrangeas would need fertilizing before fall. I had a lot to do. The will needed updating. The bank accounts needed new passwords, new designations, new clarity about who could access what and when. I wanted to call a woman at the county senior center I'd heard about. Someone who helped older adults understand their legal rights before something like this happened to them, not after. I wanted to do something with what I'd learned. Not to stay angry about it forever, but to make it useful. 30 years in a classroom taught me that a lesson is only as good as what you do with it after the test. Inside, I opened the junk drawer, the one I'd always meant to organize, and found a notepad. I sat down and wrote at the top of the first page, what I know now that I wish I'd known before. I wrote for an hour, documents to keep copies of and where to keep them, questions to ask a lawyer before you need one urgently, signs that someone you trust may be acting against your interests, how to freeze a bank account, how to contest a property transfer, practical things, the kind that feel ordinary until the moment you desperately need to know them. I filled 6 pages. Then I closed the notepad and made a cup of tea and stood at the kitchen window. The yard was dark. The hydrangeas were shapes in the shadow. The porch light made a small yellow circle on the front steps. They had counted on me staying in that cabin. They had counted on the distance, the silence, the fact that I was 68 and alone, and maybe they thought just worn down enough to go quietly. They didn't know me, or they had forgotten. You don't teach 30 years of second grade without learning that the quiet ones are often the ones paying the most attention. You don't raise a child by yourself on a teacher's salary without learning how to make something out of almost nothing. You don't love someone for 26 years and lose them and keep going without learning that you are made of something that doesn't dissolve easily. So if you're somewhere tonight and something doesn't feel right, a signature asked for too casually, a plan explained too quickly, a door that someone closed on your behalf without asking, listen to that feeling. Write down what you know. Make copies of your documents. Know the name of one person you can call. You don't have to be loud to be someone who cannot be erased. You just have to remember who you are and refuse, quietly, firmly, without apology, to let anyone make you forget.